I want to start this episode with a question that might feel a little uncomfortable. Think about the last time someone got promoted, or got a high profile opportunity, or was pulled into an important project, and your honest reaction was, really? Them? Not because they were a bad person and not because they were incompetent, but because you could think of two or three people who were clearly more skilled or more experienced or more technically capable. And somehow it still went to that person. If you've had that experience, and most of us have, I want to offer a reframe because what you were probably witnessing was not unfairness exactly, it was relationships at work. The person who got that opportunity wasn't just chosen for what they could do. They were chosen because someone trusted them, someone advocated for them, someone thought of them first, and then felt good about that thought. Here is the truth that most professional development conversations skip right past, that career growth is deeply relational. Skill is the entry fee, but relationships, ooh, those are the vehicle. Opportunities don't flow only through competence. They flow through trust. They flow through reputation, through the experience that people have of working alongside of you, through whether someone thinks of your name when a door opens, and whether, having thought of it, they feel good about saying it out loud. Your career does not grow in isolation. It grows through human systems. And if you're investing everything in your technical skills and your output and very little in the quality of your professional relationships, then you're leaving an enormous amount of growth on the table. That's what we're unpacking today. So let's get into it. Let's start with the mistake that I see most often because, like most career mistakes, it comes from such a reasonable place. And it's something that we talk about so much on the podcast. It's the belief that if I do exceptional work, then relationships will take care of themselves. We often think my career will rise if I do exceptional work, but that's not necessarily the case. And in this particular episode, we're talking about how it's not particularly the case because of the element of relationships. Look, the logic makes sense. If you're good at your job, people will want to work with you. If you deliver consistently, trust will build naturally. If you focus on results, the relationship piece will follow. And there's some truth to that. Performance does create respect, but it does not automatically create, here's a very different word, connection. And connection is what unlocks the things that performance alone cannot. That connection, it unlocks things like access and advocacy and the kind of collaboration where people pull you in because they genuinely want you in the room. The resilience of a relationship that can survive a difficult moment without breaking. I want to tell you about someone I coached, Marcus. Marcus was a senior engineer at a fast-growing tech company, and technically he was among the very best on his team. His execution was strong. His reliability, it was impeccable. And when something hard needed to get done, I mean, he was the person. He was the person that people would grab and want on that. And he was stuck. He was totally stuck. He was not being considered for leadership roles. He wasn't being pulled into the cross-functional conversations where strategy got shaped. He was, in the most polite and frustrating way possible, being left exactly where he was. So when I started working with Marcus, I asked him to describe his typical day relationally. How did he interact with his colleagues? What did the beginning of a meeting feel like? What happened when he passed someone in the hallway? And he was a little surprised at these questions. But as we discussed it, what emerged was a picture of someone who had essentially optimized himself out of human contact. He came in, he did the work, he delivered it, and he went home. He was not cold. He was not unkind. He just wasn't present in the relational sense. He didn't ask how the presentation went. He didn't follow up on things that people had mentioned the week before. He was not unfriendly. He was just transactional. And over time, people had unconsciously categorized him as excellent resource, not a leader. His competence had earned him a seat at the table, but his relational absence meant nobody was moving the chair, so to speak. Now, I want to share some research that reframes this conversation entirely because when I first came across it, it shifted how I think about what professional relationships are actually for. In the late 90s, researchers at Microsoft wanted to understand something very practical. Could they predict which software projects were going to fail? Not after the fact, before they failed, early enough to intervene. The intuitive approach would be to look at the technical factors: code quality, project scope, deadline pressure, resource allocation. And yeah, they looked at all of those things. But the strongest predictor of project failure, it turned out, was not any of those. It was, drum roll here, it was the communication patterns between the people working on the project. Specifically, researcher David Waguspach and his colleagues found that teams where people had established prior working relationships, where they had history together, where trust had been built before the project started, significantly outperformed the teams of equally skilled people who were working together for the first time. The skill level, again, was the same. The technology was the same. The only difference was the relationship infrastructure that existed or that did not exist before anyone wrote a single line of code. So what this tells us is something really profound about how professional relationships actually function. They're not just pleasant. They're not just good for morale. They are operational. They are the invisible infrastructure that determines whether talent actually converts into results. And here's the implication that I think most people miss. By the time a high stakes project lands on your team, it is too late to start building the relationships that will make it succeed. That work has to happen before, in the ordinary interactions and the casual check-ins and the small investments of attention and follow-through that don't seem urgent because nothing's on fire yet. You are always either building relational infrastructure or neglecting it. And the difference shows up most clearly when the pressure is the highest. So it's clear that these strong relationships are so important. The question is, what does it actually take to build these kind of strong professional relationships? Not superficial ones, not the kind where you know somebody's name and they know your name, but the kind that creates real trust, real advocacy, real collaboration over time. There's 4 pillars here, and let's go through them. The first pillar is attention. I want to start here because I think this is the most underrated relational skill in professional life. It's so simple that people just overlook it. And it is the one that separates the people who are genuinely magnetic from the ones who are just pleasant, surface. Attention that we're going to talk about, it is not the same thing as niceness. Niceness is easy. Being friendly, smiling, saying the right things. Anyone can do that. And we all should be doing it. But attention is something different. Attention is more intentional. It is curiosity. It is specificity. It's the act of actually tracking someone, what they're working on or what they care about, what's hard for them right now, and then showing them through your engagement that you noticed. Harvard relationship research, including work on connection and belonging, is consistent on this. Feeling seen and understood by another person is one of the most powerful trust builders that exists. Not feeling impressed by another person, that's not it. Not feeling evaluated positively, that's not it. What is it is feeling seen. The experience of someone paying real attention to you specifically. It is relatively rare, and when it happens, it registers with people. So, what does this look like in practice? It's not complicated, but it is, again, intentional. It's following up on something that someone mentioned in passing last week. Hey, how did that client presentation go? You seemed a little stressed about it. It's noticing when someone has done something worth acknowledging and saying so specifically, not generically, not great job, but saying, that initiative that you ran last quarter was really well structured. I heard it came up in the leadership meeting. It's asking a question and then actually listening to the answer rather than preparing your next point while they're still talking, which I know most of us do on a fairly regular basis. Instead of that, think about attention and think about it as social oxygen. People don't always notice when they have it, but they feel it immediately when it's present. The second pillar is reliability. And this is something we talked about in our last episode. It's worth coming back to because if attention is what starts a relationship, reliability is what sustains it. You might initially be drawn to someone because they're warm and engaging and interesting to talk to, but over time, over months, over years, what actually determines whether you trust someone deeply is whether they follow through, whether they do what they say, whether you can put something in their hands and stop thinking about it. There's a phrase that I use with clients: warmth opens the engine, reliability keeps it running. And this is especially true in professional relationships where the stakes are real. If a colleague tells you that they'll cover something and they don't, or a peer commits to a deadline and then goes quiet, that relationship doesn't just experience a bump, it experiences a recalibration. Unconsciously, you adjust how much you trust them, how much you rely on them, how openly you advocate for them. The practical version of this is very simple. Keep your commitments. Respond when you say you will. And when you genuinely can't deliver what you said you would, don't disappear. Reset the expectation before someone has to come looking for you. That single behavior, the proactive communication when things go sideways, it's one of the most powerful relational trust signals there is because it says, I'm thinking about you even when you're not in front of me. The third pillar is credible communication. Strong relationships require the courage to communicate clearly. And this is where a lot of professional relationships quietly erode, not through dramatic fallouts, big fights, but through the slow accumulation of small communication failures. Unclear expectations that were never addressed, frustrations that were never named, assumptions that were never checked, boundaries that were never set, conversations that were avoided because they just felt too awkward. And the insidious thing about communication failures is that the relationship keeps going and still you're working together. You're still being collegial, but underneath there's this layer of unresolved tension or confusion that is going to start subtly shaping every single interaction going forward. The trust, it's just leaking out, and neither person may be even fully aware of why. Credible communication is the opposite of that. It means saying what you mean, even when it's slightly uncomfortable. It means addressing issues early, saying that maybe hard thing, even when it's small and when it's early and manageable, but rather than waiting until an issue has grown into something really big and harder to navigate. It means being clear about your expectations and inviting other people to be clear about theirs. It means listening, genuinely listening, without already formulating your response, and then reflecting back what you heard to make sure that you understood them in the way that they intended, the way that they were meaning to express themselves. None of this requires confrontation. In fact, the most credibly communicative people that I know are often remarkably warm and tactful. The difference is they don't hide it behind vagueness. When something needs to be said, they find a way to say it. They say it clearly and they say it with care. And that combination, that clarity and warmth, that's what people mean when they describe someone as someone you can really talk to. That is a profound relational asset that not a lot of people cultivate. The fourth pillar here is leadership under pressure. And this is the pillar that separates the relationships that are genuinely deep from the ones that are only pleasant at the surface level. Anyone can be a good colleague when things are going well, when the project is on track, when the energy is positive and nobody's under the gun. Being warm, being collaborative, being supportive, well, that's easy. The real test of a professional relationship is what happens when the pressure rises. Does this person here escalate that stress that's in the room? Or do they absorb it? Do they get reactive and sharp when they're stretched thin? Or do they find a way to just stay grounded? Do they go silent when things get hard? Or do they lean in a healthy way? Do they handle accountability gracefully? Or do they just get defensive and give excuses or fight back? Emotional regulation research, which is another piece that we talk about in the podcast, including work by psychologist James Gross at Stanford, shows that people who demonstrate the ability to regulate their emotional responses in high pressure situations, they are consistently perceived as more trustworthy, more competent, more fit for leadership. Not because suppressing emotion is healthy or admirable, it is not, but because the expression of emotion in a way that stabilizes rather than destabilizes the people around you is a genuine skill. And people, when they see it and they hear it, they register it. In the 1990s, psychologists Elaine Hatfield, John Jacopo, and Richard Rapson were studying something they called emotional contagion, the idea that human beings unconsciously catch the emotions of the people around them, the way you catch a cold. And they knew anecdotally that moods seemed to spread in groups, but they wanted to understand how. And what they found was more automatic and more biological than most people expected. It turns out we have mirror neurons, cells in the brain that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing it. We literally simulate the emotional states of the people around us in our own nervous systems without consciously deciding to. You can't choose to absorb someone else's anxiety. Your brain does it for you. The implications for professional relationships are significant. If you regularly come into meetings stressed, sharp, dysregulated, even if you're not being unkind, the people around you are absorbing that state. Their cortisol is rising. Their thinking is narrowing. Their experience of being in a room with you is subtly uncomfortable, even if they cannot articulate why. Conversely, if you come in settled and clear and grounded, the people around you, they just feel it. They regulate to you. Their thinking opens up. The collaboration is better. They feel better and they don't know why, which means that emotional regulation is not just a personal virtue, it is a relational contribution. How you manage your own state in a room is something you're doing to the people in that room, for better or for worse, whether you intend to or not. So, back to this pillar, I worked with a leader, Diana. She had a significant pattern. When things got difficulty, like she had a very tight deadline, or she had a very tough client, or there was team friction, her default was just to go into urgency mode. Not cruelty. She wasn't mean. She wasn't being dramatic. She just got tight. She got sharp. And there was this, if you were with her, she got this palpable sense that she was running on stress. And everyone around her felt it. Her team felt it every time. So we worked on this. And what we worked on was not making her less responsive to pressure. She needed the drive. You got to keep that drive. You got to respond to that pressure. What we worked on was separating the internal experience of pressure from the external expression of it, staying grounded and staying visibly grounded, even when she felt internally stretched. And the shift was remarkable, not just in her relationships, but in her reputation. The word that her team started using about her was steady. She was steady. Which, if you know what that word means to people who've worked under leaders who are not steady, that's a big compliment, about as big a one as there is. So, everything that I have just described, the four pillars, the research, the stories, it all comes down to what you do in the ordinary moments because relationships, they're not built on big gestures. They are built every day, conversation by conversation, interaction by interaction. And the habits that build relational equity, greeting people genuinely, not as performance, but as a real acknowledgement that there's a human being in front of you who matters, asking thoughtful questions and waiting for the actual answer. Following up on things that people mentioned, not because it's a strategy, but because you are actually listening. Recognizing contributions specifically and sincerely, and offering help when you see someone stretched before they have to ask. And the habits that quietly damage it, on the other hand, are being so internally focused that you stop noticing the people around you, or you're half listening while you check your phone, or you're treating interactions as transactions, engaging when you need something, but ignoring and going quiet when you don't. Being emotionally unpredictable is a biggie, being warm and generous one week and being short and distracted the next week. Neglecting relationships when things are going well, and then reaching out only when you need something. People notice these things. They may never say it, but they notice. So here's the line that I want you to hold on to. Relationships are rarely built in those dramatic moments. They're built conversation by conversation, which means that every ordinary interaction is an opportunity. The 2-minute check in before a meeting starts, that brief exchange in the elevator, the follow up email that wasn't strictly necessary, but definitely showed someone that you were thinking of them. These are small things. They seem like it, but they're actually not. They're material that relationships are made of. So let's bring this together. Strong professional relationships, they're not accidental. They don't just happen to people who are likable or lucky or naturally charming. They're built through attention, through reliability, through the courage to communicate clearly, and through the ability to show up steadily when the pressure's on. And they matter. They matter in ways that are easy to underestimate when you're early in your career or mid career and you're focused on building skill because the relational payoff tends to be slower and less visible than a performance review or a completed project. Ooh, but that connection, that relational payoff, it's over time, but it compounds. The colleagues who trust you become the advocates who open doors. The manager who finds you easy to work with becomes the sponsor who puts your name in rooms that you're not in. The reputation that you build as someone who makes collaboration better, not harder, becomes the reason that people choose you over someone equally skilled. I think about Marcus sometimes, the engineer that I mentioned at the start. And he's, of course, now in a leadership role, not because his technical skills improved, they were already excellent, but because he invested. He invested deliberately in becoming someone that people wanted to be in the room with. He started paying attention. He started following through on the small human things. He started showing up to interactions like they mattered because they do. And the door opened. Your career does not grow in isolation. It grows through human systems. And the question worth sitting with today is not just to ask yourself, am I good enough? It's to ask yourself, am I someone that people trust? Do they enjoy working with me? Am I someone that they believe in? Because that combination, competence and connection, that is what actually creates the conditions for a career that rises. So here's what I want you to do this week. Just one thing. Choose one professional relationship that you want to strengthen and do one specific intentional thing to invest in it. Don't make it a grand gesture, just something small and real. Maybe you follow up on something they mentioned, or you recognize something they did. You check in genuinely without an agenda. And as you do it, ask yourself the question that I think cuts to the heart of this episode. When my name comes up in a room I'm not in, what do people feel? Do they feel trust? Do they feel warmth? Do they feel confidence? Do they reach for your name when something matters because they know what they're getting? That feeling in other people about you is built relationship by relationship, interaction by interaction, one ordinary conversation at a time. Start today, and I'll see you in the next episode.